We made a presentation Wednesday where we presented the results. Some of you were there, where we also demonstrated a little bit how we've been working. And then yesterday we had a concert, so that was full focus on the artistic expression, which also, of course, is the results, constitutes the results of this project. But today we want to focus on more kind of artistic research perspectives. We want to get feedback, of course, on our project, and also have a discussion together with you later on. And it's important for many reasons, I would say. Of course, one is to connect with the artistic research community, to get our project scrutinized in terms of the methodology we've been using, the results we've arrived at. And I think especially with artistic research, since it's a bit difficult, artistic methods, artistic practices are become part of the methodology of artistic research, and that places high demands on being able to do it in a way that produces something relevant and valuable. So that's one thing that I'm curious about to hear, of course, from our invited researchers. And also to see how the results we've come up with, how that possibly changes things, if it's relevant for other artistic contexts, maybe also contexts outside of art practices. Artistic research for me is very special. It offers possibilities to work with embodied knowledge in many ways, to also present other alternative views of knowledge in and through art, and also to discuss the role of art in relation to other contexts like social, political, society, and so forth, education. So there are a lot of things that are possible to focus on in the project, of course. So let me start by presenting the artistic researchers that we have invited. I can start over there. There's somebody missing. Henrik is på vift. We have Annette Arlander to the far left. Oh, the right for you. Annette Arlander is a performance artist and a professor in performance art and theory at Stockholm University of Arts. Yes, you have to excuse me for reducing the complexity of all your work and lives into a single short sentence, so please feel free to add or say something about that. So your specialty is not necessarily music, but this is also, of course, an important contribution, I think, to have someone who has so much knowledge about performance and artistic research from a little bit of a different perspective. Then we have Henrik Frisk, composer, musician, improvising musician, saxophone, electronics, and you are senior lecturer in musical performance here at Royal College of Music. That's correct? Yes. And we have Hedås, also composer, senior lecturer in composition here at Royal College of Music. We have Stefan Östersjö, newly appointed professor in musical performance at the College of Music in Piteå. Also soloist, experimental work with various string instruments and many, many other things that you've been doing over the years. And last but not least, we have Åsa Stjerna, who installation artist, and also just a little bit more than a week ago defended your doctoral thesis at the Academy of Music and Drama in Gothenburg. And let me see the name. Before Sound, Transversal Processes in Site-Specific Sonic Practice. Yes. And also, you've also been doing work that is a little bit analogical or overlaps with stuff we have done. So I'm very happy that you wanted to also take the lead in this first part today to present your perspective of the project as a whole, and also moderate a discussion together with the research team and the rest of the panel. And then we will take a break, a lunch break. I have reserved an area which is closest to the info desk towards the main entrance, so you can buy lunch here at the restaurant, and also so you can be seated in that area over there. I hope there will be enough seats for everyone. I'm really happy that so many want to come for this seminar. It's fantastic. And after the break, we will also invite the other panelists to present their themes, questions, comments on the project, and also open up for a discussion together with the auditorium, together with you. I'm not going to say very much about the project because Åsa has also prepared your view, how you perceive it. I will say that we have the website with quite a few audio and video recordings, also some texts. But then there is a text that the panelists, it's roughly 100 pages, a text that describes the process, the methodology, and the results of this project, which is not public yet, but will be in some form, maybe some articles or maybe even a book or something. But we have all read it. So it goes a little bit more in depth than the material that is at the website. And the project has been going on for 3 years. We're finishing it now. We've been doing a series of research labs and artistic productions, inviting various guests and experimenting in many different ways. And also, a few of the panelists have been involved as guests in our project before, Henrik Frisk, Hedås, and Stefan Östersjö. Yes. So Annette and Åsa have not been involved before. So there's a mixture of some inside knowledge and outside knowledge, so to speak. Yes, I think maybe that's enough, and because you will be presenting also the main, I think, purposes and aims of the project and stuff like that, yeah. So I will simply give the word to Åsa Stjerna, and then we'll move on.
So, is it working? I thought this was the time to switch on my microphone. That's why I've been so silent. I didn't know if it was working together. First of all, I would like to say that I'm tremendously thankful for being invited to this seminar today. And it's a bit, it's really amazing because I'm kind of, this is the effect of a process that's been going on more than 3 years with so many actors and agencies involved, spanning from the research project members to all invited researchers, musicians, readings, books, spaces, instruments, the creation of the website. So it's really, fantastic to be here. And I think it's good for the audience to know that I represent, if I'm allowed to say that in a context like this, the part of an audience that I have not been experienced the project live. So my take today will briefly concentrate on part 1 of the paper, the documents that we were given, and as well as the website. And I think this might also be how many people will experience the project afterwards. So I thought that might also contribute to something, misunderstandings or whatever that can be fruitful for a kind of discussion. So my intention for today is that I'm going to do my reading of the project. How do I understand it? What is this project actually about? What is at stake? What paths and methods and methodologies are this project actually producing as a kind of response on the issues at stake in the project? And I hope that from that I will be able to make some issues that can be relevant for discussion further on. sharing experiences. And I think it should be mentioned that this PowerPoint that was actually made for my own personal purposes, but I think it's nice so we can share some. It's a very basic PowerPoint presentation. So the very aims and purposes with the project, as I understand it, has been to explore collective improvisation in music, and thereby contributing to deeper understanding of collective creativity by considering relationships between such things as control, freedom, and individuality. And these are issues that you can find on the website, of course, because these are the kind of what I refer to as the research questions. Or research aims or aims. And these could be posed as questions such as, when is a creative process truly collective beyond the sums of individual contributions? How can we create methods that enhance collective creativity? And what is the social or political importance of collective creativity? And as far as I understand that, it's not simply a thing about playing together, but really more specifically what happens when you go beyond the individual's ability to what you constantly write and express, to fully control or grasp the influence of his or her contribution in relation to the compositional process as a whole. So that is one of the aims or really big issues is when and how improvisation becomes markedly collective. And that also seems to inquire, an important thing is the inquiry into the relationships between power and domination in collective improvisation. It's not only about improvising together, but nevertheless, it's not only a freedom of improvisation or but not on the other side, not kind of consensus idea of what improvisation might be that the group shared, which has necessitated an inquiry into relationships between power and domination. So, and you pose questions such as, how can we powerfully affect each other without dominating? What methods, materials, or circumstances enhance the mutual reinforcement of power in collective improvisation? Yeah. And I think that one of the main issues, or one absolutely most crucial issues in the project is the non-linear processes. That theory and practice merge together. We're going to talk much more about that in a few moments. But the idea of designing and conducting musical experiments, you have discussed what happened afterwards. You've developed concepts and methods, and everything kind of resonates with each other all the times. And the time span that this has been made, that the processes have been repeated time after another. And you're writing something which I also found crucial for the project. You write that our ambition has not only been to develop new methods for collective improvisation, but also to problematize terms in common use around improvisation, such as the notions of freedom. Our research is not about communicating an already established artistic practice, but rather about how this practice has changed in and through the research project, which I found extremely crucial. And the process has been going on for a long time, as I referred to earlier, where different kind parts, different discourses, if we may say so, material, sonic, textual and instrumental discourses kind of resonate, are allowed to resonate and constantly affect each other. So there's been a very strong ambition not to separate theory and practice. You're writing about motivators, the driving forces for conducting this research project, and where you write that one of those are complexity, which you refer to as nonlinear dynamics and emergence, reciprocal interaction, kind of positive feedback mechanism, which kind of includes how improvisers simultaneously influence each other in ways that makes it impossible to understand exactly what happens, so to speak. And also the term heterogeneous assemblage, which you refer to as an interconnection or of diverse but overlapping elements, a non-coordination or non-unification that produces affective or what you refer to as intensive resonances, and transversality, which you refer to as diagonal cuts or the undoing of polarities, such as the relation between theory and practice. As well as playfulness, which you refer to as ways in which control and non-control can be put to work with each other in creative ways. And these musical experiments that you've been undertaking have been designed in relation to three concepts or three areas, maybe it's better to pose them as, where one is disorder, the other is counterplay, and the third one is complexity. Where you're writing that musical experiments have been designed in relation to the concept of productive disorder. So you have a kind of a positive attitude towards disorder in terms of possibility or virtual capacity to become something, where you want to explore various forms of complexity that can establish collective creativity. Yeah, so it's about less control, but it's not about unstructured composition. You also terms counterplay, playing against or beside each other, that creates a resonance, but also a resistance to adjust the musical environment. And what you refer to as the results include a set of abstract methods that serve as enabling constraints for creating or interweaving heterogeneity or increase heterogeneity, I would say. And the form, they can be understood as three interconnected assemblages called motivators, modulators, and the diagram. Yeah. And the diagram, this is one excerpt that I took from the website. So I guess this might be more connecting to the term of attractors, connectors and resonators. The diagram assembles this project's different concepts and methods in a map that should be understood as a dynamic, affective environment, which is made for making possibilities. So it shouldn't be understood as a instruction in a sense that it's already determined, the paths are already determined, but it's emphasizing open-endedness, affective exchange, so to speak. And I'm a little bit interested in gardening, so I was thinking about how is it possible? Could you look at this in terms of a kind of garden, where all the kind of what you refer to, the methods or abstract method, could be understood as what you call it, seed, frön, which are fully capable, virtual, existing, possible realities not yet actualized. So what this schema or the diagram actually seeks is kind of not suggestions, but promoting, uppmanar. How do you say that, Kat? Uppmanar. Invite for actualization of futures yet to come. Yeah. And I think that is one of the absolutely really interesting challenges in this project, how you have developed different sorts of affective concepts, and as well as what you call abstract methods, or affective methods might be another opportunity to term them. It's a virtual potentiality where things could be, through the act of playing together, could be actualized. But you should never see the result as stable forms. The music or the artistic act should always be considered in terms of a process where you create momentarily thresholds of actualization, if I may say so. And I would say that what I found as the most challenging and interesting, as well as complex with the project, is the really issue of criticizing established notion of production. On the one hand, the production of what collective improvisation might be, and I guess you all sharing experiences of how it works in your daily life, which I'm very interested to hear more about later on. But also the notion of production in a more shall we say, ontological or philosophical way. And what is production? How is it established? And this issue in somehow influences the whole idea of what practice is, what theory is, the relation between theory and practice, as well as what an artistic subject might be. And you're using so-called process philosophy as a kind of main ontological or philosophical framework, what is in the project referred to as meta theory, which partly departs from Deleuze and Guattari, Manuel de Landa, Rosie Braidotti, and Tasmin Lorraine. And now I feel I have the obligation to, like in 3 minutes, explain the relation between representation and transversality or process philosophy. So, which is really not so easy. But I will give it a try. And if you don't understand, we can continue to talk about it later. Because I would say that this is what is really at stake in this. Process from really how you create your methodologies, as well as what one could refer to the epistemological contributions in the project. So,
is the sound okay outside?
So what the project seems to think is that the way you speak produces the way you think about production, of course, affect how you do production. So, in somehow it demands a vocabulary that's able to contextualize the act of collective improvisation in a manner that exceeds simplified forms of transcendence, or what's also quite often referred to representations. It's all quite often referred to as I'm wondering how the problem with representation can be connected to the philosophical notion of transcendence, or referring to philosopher Christoph Cox, which is also referred to in the text, describes the way in which the Western traditions of representation is grounded in a kind of ancient and venerable hylomorphic model, according to which the genesis of entities requires a kind of external imposition of form upon an inert matter. So it requires, in order to produce something, we need an external force. And that's kind of been a tradition from the Judeo-Christian tradition, Plato, Aristotle, and it kind of continues to grip on the scientific and aesthetic imagination also today. And as a consequence, there is a kind of established dual planes, a separation between culture, nature, human, non-human, sign, world, text, matter. So many contemporary philosophical models of knowledge production originate from and continue to maintain a separation between the material conditions that generate artistic productions and those that generate the artistic contents, and often favoring the latter at the cost of seeing the processual aspects as crucial for the practice. So this is something which I found really crucial for how you try to approach the project. But thinking about artistic practice, it's not about resemblance or representation that is at stake, but rather difference that allows focus to be placed on what the practice is capable of producing, what it can do, so to speak. So I think this is one of the crucial issues for the project, because what is crucial for process philosophy, or central for it, is the idea that all production, understand in its most open way, emerges from the same plane of production, without any external influencing factors. Everything that emerges could be understood as constituting effects and various in these systems, and that's how I read the diagram, that you're trying to create an environment where you explore how different approaches influence each other and resonate, so to speak. And it's a kind of dynamic and affective process where the crucial factors emerge in encounters and confrontation between bodies or assemblages and their internal components. So it's a kind of transversal process in constant flux. So it's about the affective relations between bodies, the affects that bodies are capable of, and how relations are generated by the effects, so to speak. And I think that this in somehow influence very much both the relation in your project between theory and practice, because theory is never only theory, but it's an act of producing something. It's a performative act. It's something that has the capability of effect and changing something. It does not represent something, so it produces something. And I think it's been very interesting to see how you try to merge the relation between theory and practice. And of course, how this influences the idea of artistic research, as well as the methodological and conceptual development. And not last but not least, the autonomy of the artist subject. Because you've been trying to exceed a kind of conventional idea of the artist subject as an individual, but tries rather kind of experimenting with as far as I see it, the kind of research groups as effective bodies, which in somehow influence and affect each other, and how this in somehow creates different kind of thresholds in terms of the artistic outcomes. And I think that the main contribution in this project is the development of transdisciplinary methods which links together composition, interpretation and improvisation, which I found has a huge potential to be further developed. And from a kind of epistemological perspective, it really contributes to understanding the relation between theory practice in artistic research as a field of production. And of course, it's critique of individualist and conservative norms of creativity as something that often is referred to as a autonomous artist subject, which you highly questions. That was my short and very non-theoretical take on the project and contributions. And I would like to start to ask you, Claes, if it's okay, why did this project start? What was the need, or because I guess it stems from experiences in your own practice.
Yeah, that's a good question. Where does it start, things? It was funny. Someone had put a copy of a thing I wrote in the paper for this school in 1993, I think, and I haven't read it since then. And somebody put it in my box here yesterday evening, and I started reading it, and I realized, wow, I've been working with the same issues since I was 21, and it was quite amazing actually. Maybe somebody here actually put it in my books. I still don't know who did that. I was very happy about it anyway, and I raised those questions that are kind of crucial and central to this project already back then. But of course, there have been other things happening, and we started working with a trio, me and Wilhelm and Rickard. I don't know, maybe it's eight years ago or something like that. Where the intention was to improvise for audiences and also talk about what we were doing, because I felt this need to connect with audiences and create like more understanding around improvisation, and that project was actually also called Music and Disorder. So we had that idea already, and we were visiting different schools, art schools. It was a really fascinating encounter, I think, and we started trying to find how our ways of approaching improvisation could work together with, or how it could be seen in other contexts, and how it could also maybe become relevant for other art forms, but also what we could learn from other art forms. So in that encounter, in that process, it becomes, of course, necessary to have some kind of abstraction, to find those places where we can connect across particular solutions. So for me, abstraction is a fantastic thing, because it offers contact points in a way. And for some reason, abstraction sometimes is like a bad word in media or something, as if it was something bad. But of course, it can be. It can become like very head-based or.
Could you just develop a little bit around what you refer to as abstract?
Yeah.
Abstraction.
Yeah, because I agree, that's important. I mean, things can be abstract in different ways, and of course, when it's abstract in a representational thinking, like you just mentioned, then it becomes something that's distanced, maybe from bodies, from affects, and it becomes this fixing, this capturing of specific situations or solutions, and then it misses all the things that are messy and in process and all that. So what I think is fascinating with abstraction is when we can find those ways of thinking, like you said, affect and through affect, or thinking intensively in a way that allows us to kind of grasp how things connect with each other over the particular solutions, if it's musical solutions or actualizations or whatever we want to call it, those. So it's, of course it's a kind of abstraction that's different, I guess, from the many versions of abstraction that do happen in education and in many other social contexts, which I'm not very interested in, because it doesn't connect with bodies, it doesn't connect with process, with complexity and messiness. But I guess it's something that I've always been interested in. This kind of abstraction that allows for new kinds of production, new kinds of encounters, and something like that. And of course, this has been what we've been working for quite a few years, and it became clear in this project also that we started out actually with some compositions and started breaking them down and trying to find how could we started abstracting them, I would say, and find different ways to work with similar issues like.
But I'm very interested because, I mean, I'm not going to try to hide it, that I'm not working as an improvisation musician or a composer at all. So I'm very curious because you come from such different traditions. That's how what I at least estimate. But it seems to be that the issue of thinking intensive or thinking in the kind of, you talk about the possible abstractions, that you have something in common, independent on where the different traditions you come from. Is this something you could maybe comment on, Anna? Maybe. What's your experience of working as improvisation musicians, and how does this project eventually differ, or does it?
It does differ a lot.
And in what ways?
I would say that to see this 3 years as a travel or whatever, a voyage together, I would say that in the beginning our differences were important. Of course, we come with so much different experiences and backpacks, whatever, and luggage and ideas, and for me personally, improvisation has been a special voyage into a kind of a freedom. From freedom from the score, or freedom from the constraints of being somebody's interpreter. But this has, through this process, become less and less important, because it is actually the experiences that we have done together, and through this, let's say, intensive thinking and doing, mostly through doing and playing together and making these experiences, this has changed. It's not important anymore to such an extent that we have these different backgrounds. I think aesthetics is always, everybody has, we all have aesthetics, but we also have somehow created a playground, to put it really nice, there where these aesthetics actually have molded into something that we have together. And also the improvisation is, I would really see this as collective thinking in a very special way.
Why not? You do?
I do.
You do? Yeah, okay. Okay, so, yeah.
Yeah, collective thinking, collective concentration, a collective kind of intense moments together that is... of course, it's based on improvisation, but it is also something more, which is... we can go on talking about this.
Kat, how do you find that this project differs from other experience of collective improvisation?
Yeah, my background, I've been involved in collective improvisation in underground spaces since I was 13 years old. So this is a really interesting difference. And this project is different in how deeply articulated things are and how it's removed from the world. It's in this sort of space that's not out. And, you know, for me, improvised music is very much interwoven with city life, with community things, with I often use the example of a reductionist improvisation group I knew in Boston, who told me that their rehearsal process was playing 1980s video games and eating junk food. And then they would come out and make the most specific kind of improvised music that was inspired by like Axel Derner, you know, and it was a mystery. And it was supposed to be a mystery. It was supposed to not be articulated because they too are working with the abstract and with breaking methods of production and all of these things. And the way that they do that is sort of by an anti-articulation. And that's really common in a lot of the scenes I've been in. So to be able to come into this space and have a total trust amongst people who come from really different backgrounds, so to speak. Not, in some ways not, you know. And to really articulate what we're doing and then break it. And articulate it again and break it. To go through that process verbally in parallel affects the music in a really wonderful way. That I think if I tried to explain that in a lot of the scenes that I'm in, most people would be suspicious of. They'd be like, wow, you know, you can't talk and play. Oof. You know, and because a lot of this music is outside of the academic world. And like, so this space has become a place of total trust in a way where nothing's illegal. There's no like idiomatic illegal thing you can do because it can all go back into this abstracted space where things can be broken and rebuilt and broken and rebuilt. Like the seed, like the garden. I also thought about gardens. When I first saw these diagrams, I was thinking about the hanging gardens, that they're things that you can wander through and take non-sounding. You said that when you see the diagram, it doesn't sound for you. Yeah, it doesn't sound, and that's wonderful. It means that you can fill it with anything, and collectively, yeah. So, the collective trust that grows out of this breakage is very special and completely unique in my life as an improviser.
I think that's a really interesting aspect because you talk a lot about trust, and I think you also did that, Anna. Because I'm thinking about the kind of how this could be used in a kind of pedagogue way. I don't know if you're interested in that at all, but how important is the fact that you know each other and that you spend a lot of time together?
Quite early in the process, we decided to emphasize our shared experiences. So we come into a situation like this, and in any situation we come into it as individuals with our own experiences from other experiments or whatever, other situations. But very early, and I think this was crucial for building trust and our environment within this group, was to emphasize our shared experience of what was actually happening when we met. And not thinking too much about how it usually is, or how it was the last time we did something with another group, or like just focusing so much on what was happening there and then within the group and in that particular experience and experiment. So these shared experiences was focus, and I think pedagogically that resonates well. I think you can build any group if you focus on shared experiences, because then suddenly it becomes democratic, and all of us has the same possibility. If you focus on our individual experiences from before, then it's something else. Then it becomes hierarchy. But if you focus on shared experiences within any situation, it suddenly becomes equal. So that's trust.
You also talking in the project about unlearning, and I think that might have something with that to do, or maybe you want to... yeah. Because shared, I mean, it requires another way of approaching collective improvisation, which I think, as far as I understand, is one of the main issues of approaching collective improvisation in a kind of depersonalized way, or kind of collective subjectivity, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say that when we started this project, we all had the idea of challenging our habits and how we usually play, and to really experiment.
And how did that play out in practice or in daily life? That's the thing you never hear about, but maybe...
Yeah, in practice I would say that the diagram and the modulators are really helpful tools. Like the modulator score, you could see it as a tweaking map, or how to focus on different parts of musical material or interactions that are all somewhat connected. So by working with these modulators with the diagram, that like stretched maybe at least my habits, so I could start to play in a different way than I usually did. But I also want to comment on that with shared experiences and the difference that we had in the beginning. Like, we focused on what we were doing together, but we also had like these meetings where we presented something from our own practice to the group. So something that we all had very dear or worked with became one part of the shared experiences that we had as a group. And that also, I think that contributed a lot, both conceptually and the way how we started to perceive details in each other's playing.
May I just add one thing that I think is important? I mean, with this shared experience concept, it's not that we try to... that's how I think about it, at least. It's not that we try to avoid our different experiences or something like that. I guess it's really this transversality to undo the polarization of the difference and unity, in a way, because it's the shared experiences that we're talking about here is maybe difference in unison or unity in diversity or something like that, something that cuts across those things, and that's, I think, what we were looking for. And these inputs from each of the members, of the different guests, and the way, but it has more. I guess it had more to do with how we would handle. Make these differences become productive in the situation that we were working very directly, and not presuppose a certain understanding or a certain experience or knowledge in order to communicate or do something. And I think that's what we managed to create. I mean, it didn't take form immediately. It did take some time, and I think that whole process of building this trust, of working with these challenges of creating collectivity, and the way that we have documented it, and also thought about it philosophically, I think that's an important contribution in itself, in terms of artistic research, to the way we would use motivators and different methods, and stage these research labs and stuff like that. I mean, we didn't have any preconceived idea that was going to happen. It was something that kind of emerged. We trial and error, and we realized that there were some dissonances maybe, or we had different understandings, or things wouldn't happen the way we wanted it. So we kept trying, and we found these possibilities. So, and also I think these conceptual resources also have been very important. We haven't kind of relied on a certain pre-established kind of theory or theoretical system or philosophy, but we've been constantly using concepts to find ways to create trust and work experimentally in a way that would bring our differences into a productive, creative situation, I think. Yeah.
I found that you use methods in two ways that I'm a bit curious about. On the one hand, which you refer to as abstract methods that are kind of assembled or in the diagram, the kind of the abstract methods that are more practically approached. But you're also talking about enabling constraints as a kind of method. Is there someone of you who want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, these things are both, they're sort of, the enabling constraints I think of as containers in a way. Also, like, they have a set of fairly open parameters in a way, if you were to just state them. Like, rotator is, you know, in its absolute most simplest, you know, form would be that there are different cycles of rhythm going that are mostly silent, and then there are some points on them. But that particular, there's a little cloud up there, it says rotator, there. But that contains the day that Ricard came and showed us something from his practice. It contains the day that composer Helen Abdulis came and showed us her cog compositions. It contains the idea of polyperiodicity. It contains some of the nomadic theory that you've been reading, where like conflictual simultaneous realities exist, and that this is another form of collective work. And so that this one word then becomes a sigil. And it's rare out in outer life that you would have such a defined sigil for such a defined and yet broad group of shared experiences in the context of a whole bunch of those. So I was just thinking today when we were playing, I was playing from this rotator idea. We didn't plan anything this morning, we just got up and played for you. But I would, and this is something I would never ever do outside of here. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think that partly yes. Is there anyone else who has the idea of enabling constraints in relation to collective improvisation?
Yeah, I mean it is a term that we adopted from Brian Masumi and Aaron Manning, who also talked about structured improvisation and finding ways to set up a situation that doesn't determine what's going to happen, but conditions like you said, on a playground or something, an open space. And I guess this is the challenge in pretty much anything we do. How can we set up a situation where something collective can happen, where we need a certain kind of constraint for things to happen, but they can't be over-determining, because then we can't really meet each other, we can't encounter each other in that. So, I mean, this challenge, whatever we do, I think, and whether it's improvisation or not. And, of course, the difficulty is to find those enabling constraints. Where are they most effective, productive, in a way? And the way I've been thinking about it in this project is this notion of interweaving heterogeneity, to really have differences that are actively working against each other, but they also need some kind of overlap, some kind of communicative structure that doesn't take away these differences, that doesn't annul this divergence. For me, that's the kind of holy grail. I mean, it's whether it's in art or it's socially, politically, in whatever context, because that's where creativity is. That's where it can become more democratic, if you want to call it that, in a real sense, not the rule of the majority. Something that's more an encounter. So, of course, we do this all the time, more or less implicitly, as artists or any creative work. We find these, we try to find these enabling constraints, but within this project we try to articulate it as much as possible. And it's for that reason also, I think it is a very it's very useful pedagogically. It is something which could be used, of course, in a pedagogic format as well.
A small addition, just I think also this individually, you actually have. I have the feeling that we have, at least, I mean, really for me, and I think we share this, is that you have now the possibilities to be more distinct, because we share these abstract concepts, and you can always interpret them very individually and be very distinct in your own expression, or in the moment when you do something you contribute into the collective music. And that is, I think, that for me personally is one of the really strong experiences from these years of work together, that you actually can be in the collective process, be the more distinct, that you can be more distinct within the collective than I would have expected or even been able to before this project.
I'm curious about the daily transversality, so to speak, the practicing of transversality as a daily part in the practice. How did it take place? How did it play out? For instance, the relation between you were reading text and then you tried to somehow implement or let it resonate with your practice. And I don't remember, one of you guys said that it's easier if you kind of relate to this more theoretical or affective concepts in a more abstract way than trying to materialize them. I don't know, one of you said that on a more practical level, sometimes it's not easy to relate to them on a direct practical level. So what
Who said that?
We don't recognize that.
Okay. Okay. So.
But maybe someone wants to comment on that. How we would use the transversal, connect the theory and practice and reading and practice and stuff.
I mean, it's a big issue, and I imagine it's. If I got the question, I would really not appreciate it. But it's crucial. It's a crucial thing how things resonate, and also how the act of playing resonated with theoretical issues. So I think it's not a kind of police rehearsal. I'm just curious. There is no right or wrong, right?
I can answer very shortly. I don't. I make music. Of course, everything in life affects me making music, but it's making music. I mean, practice is the core, but it doesn't mean that this doesn't mean anything. But everything means so much. So.
I would say in terms of this project, it would be that Claes maybe suggested something that we would read and discuss. Then like talking about how can we implement this in music, and then we would make experiments. And then afterwards we would have a discussion and then like see if these concepts resonated with what we were doing, or if what we were doing like spurred some thought or ideas that we then could take back to the playing situation. So it was always this like oscillating between discussing, reading, playing, back and forth, like in a feedback loop, I would say. So that's like how we practically, in the group at least, for me, how I experienced that we practiced this.
Yeah, I can say something also.
Okay.
No, I think for me it's been important that we actually also have had this set of concepts that we have been returning to all the time, and many of these, or some of these concepts were part of work previous to this project. So we already brought some stuff in. It's not like we started from scratch with this project. We would connect things to previous experience and so forth. But I think the most important thing for me has been that these, you mentioned some of them, like disorder, complexity, some of the central concepts, but also other of these motivators, that they would constantly mutate, they would constantly change, and we write a lot about this in the paper, also in the documentation, the importance of that, to allow concepts to change, to be mobile, to become useful, I think, for artistic practice. They have to be mobile. That's the whole issue. But they can't be, of course, again, they can't be completely all over the place, because then they won't be useful either. So it's always it comes back to the same issue of enabling constraints also in conceptual thinking, whether we are pedagogues or whatever we are working with, to find these ways of using concepts that enable us to open up dimensions in practice or thinking, but also constraining something, because otherwise we're just moving completely without direction. So we didn't actually, it's not like we studied certain text and then we're going to do this and now we're just talking about that. We would use various inspirations and then they would constantly change and mutate in and through our discussions and experiments. And for me, I think I have a different perspective also than the rest of the group in a way, because I have listened through all of the discussions we've made. And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of hours of discussions and experiments, and constantly moving between them, transcribing some of the stuff and also editing and picking out more of the important stuff. So for me, it's so clear how we've been constantly oscillating, like you said, between practice and theory. And it's not even an oscillation. It's a continuum. For me, it just moves a little bit more this direction, more that direction. It's not like it's two different worlds, like you said before. That would be a crazy idea for me.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to say? Yes, I think too, because I would like to invite the panel afterwards.
Okay,
I'm just curious to hear, Kat.
Yeah, I just wanted to put sort of a footnote, I guess, that I hear this word constraint and I hear this word distinction, and that these dovetail for me as similar things: the constraint from the theoretical side, distinction from the practice side, and that for me they are one and the same in this particular room. If that helps to articulate. Thanks.
Okay, so I would like to invite the panel, and I would like to start with a general comment or a question on the possibility. I think this project very clearly shows the possibility of working with transversal processes. I thought, Annette, maybe you want to take on that. The possibility of using transversal processes in artistic research.
Well, I like the word transversal, but I don't use it. I like the idea of sort of diagonals between different levels and hierarchies, but if you ask me about transversality, this is difficult. But I could read a little bit, maybe it links to it, the beginning of my notes, if I find them. I just then I can say something freely, but it's better if I read it to explain my practices as far as approximately as far as you can get from collective music improvisation. So I wrote this, and it's true that the report was a very inspiring text to read, and especially the beginning, describing the process philosophical starting points. And at some point I realized that the text had almost convinced me that collective music improvisation was the only meaningful and politically relevant thing to do in the world today. So I felt sort of a strong envy for all artists with a practice that could somehow be transformed into improvisation on one hand and to a collective creative practice on the other. And that's really a character of the text now. I'm not speaking of my experience of the music, which was also lovely, but this was just reading the text. But then the main point, the diagram itself was not as inspiring. Or, well, now it's here and it looks much better when it's white on black, but somehow I was resisting the visual outlook at first, although the words themselves, the names for the machines, have some real affective power. And I'm really struck with the names. Then there is a lot of explanations, and the words are only very surface, like tip of the iceberg, and then there is a whole other thing. But if you just look at the name of the machines, they're really inspiring. Since my work I work with a static camera as spectator and place my body in specific places in the environment, often repeatedly, my initial reaction was to think that the diagram and its components would be of no use to me. But it could be fine for somebody manipulating the visual image, for instance, like in the same way you can manipulate a digital video image in the same way as you can manipulate sound, electronic sound, of course, as a digital sound flow, or then about dance improvisation or anybody sort of doing things and changing what they do in time, even like craft, even ornament, even sort of combining different sewing. Everybody else could use it but me. I don't go into it, but maybe I should say, because you asked about transversality, that I think there is something very inspiring in using theory to generate concepts that can stimulate artistic work, to create words that serve as prompts, as scores of a kind, rather than as descriptions. That is, to make concepts that are performative, as you mentioned, in the sense of making things in the world, rather than constatives, that is, describing things in the world. But the test for such concepts is then to see if they really can do something. And it's perhaps to ask for too much to say that some concepts can work for all kinds of artists. And I think it's completely fine if some concepts are productive only within some fields. But of course, it's kind of provocation to claim something to be general or universal or even widely applicable, and invited one to try to think how that would be possible. But I don't want to go into that, because I then really tried a little bit. I don't want to go into that, but this idea of the performative instead of the descriptive or constative, I think that's maybe on a sort of a methodological level the point. Somebody else continue.
Stefan, Henrik, and Kim, you all been invited during the process in this project, so you might have a kind of partly, shall we call it, insider perspective. You have any general comments on that, or maybe you have other comments you want to comment on?
Maybe can I start, or were you interrupting you? Yeah, because I was thinking about, because I have been invited to this project twice before, and the first was very early in the start, and you have been working just, I think, 2 months or so, and you presented the text, and you had also done 2 concerts, and I was listening and reading the text. And then I was a bit confused, because I thought that it was divided between theory and practice, and we talked about that. And now I'm very pleased, because I think this is not the case. The aim that you have for collective creativity, you have really built an environment for this and managed to do this thing, practice and theory together. So this has been, from my perspective, since I have been following this, I think it's very good.
Henrik?
Yes, if I may, I can continue. Let me pull up my notes. But I must agree with Annette that I think that I think that it's a very inspiring read, and I'm really looking forward to the finalized text. I think that in itself is a really great contribution. But what I'm struggling with is again how to. Okay, so so yes, that was part of the project, and we played together, and I had that experience, and it was a very powerful experience. I mean, it took some time to get into it, but it was very different from many of the other contexts that I've been part of. So that was really inspiring.
In what way? In what way?
Well, because it was. I mean, so this. I mean, the diagrams and the concepts and all this is quite I mean, it's a bit of an obstacle, really, when you want to play, because it's there. And
so, what was it? Was the diagram already kind of developed or in development process when you was invited?
But so in the course of not so much time, I mean, we had 2 days together. It was possible for me to go beyond the concepts, but then I had this. I mean, I'm almost hesitant to say it, but it was a particular experience that. So some of these topological properties of this diagram were real, experientially. I mean, so when I was playing, I had this idea that I was moving around in this space together with the other players. So that in itself is it says a couple of things. It says that, well, there's something in that's important, and that can be developed in other kinds of improvisatory communities, I think, and contexts. That's for sure. But it was also this, I think Stefan and I both had this, we did this together, that we were asking ourselves, well, aren't these really compositions? Isn't this like a manner of putting down instructions for performing a piece? But it became very clear that that's not what it is. So this is not a representation of a music. It's a system that has some properties and affordances, I think. But I think, I mean, all of that brings forward one of the major challenges in any artistic research is that how can we make that useful outside of this experiential performative context? How can that in itself be? If we have the time, I mean, I'm afraid this is a bit lengthy, but I would like to I have some thoughts to this, and I want to bring back to the panel, and then maybe after lunch we can continue the discussion. But because it is this thing that what is completely self-evident and natural in the situation of playing can become extremely enigmatic and even banal when you're outside of that situation of playing. And so that's where a lot of the times in artistic research we turn to, for example, philosophy, to then find ways and theoretical ways that resonate with this experience. But I mean, one of the things then that this is all related to is the question of what is really the result in artistic research, or what can it be, and what should be communicated, and what is this part of it. And it just made me think of an experience that I had a couple of years ago. I was in Belgrade and met groups of artists and people, and they're in this sort of post-communism, post-Yugoslavia, post-NATO, and it's the society is very disruptive. And one of the things that they had before all of this was they had a really strong culture of debating. So the debate, and they kept on talking about this, that the debate had a so they got together in public spaces and they discussed political and social issues. So that debate was was a property, and that was something that it couldn't find its place in this hyper capitalist society that had become. And I guess, but I'm not sure, but I guess that what we call in Swedish föreningslivet is a similar thing to that. I mean, places where people get together and they discuss things. It may be how to, produce things, or maybe how to organize your living in a house. But so these processes, isn't that? I just started thinking that that's what this is. So that the process of playing, the importance of that goes way beyond the actual result of the playing. And this is, I guess, what you were talking about too. So what's important is not to fall into the trap and look at the product result of this. That's just that could be interesting in itself, but it's really just a proxy. Something that we can see what was really going on, but that so that the ethical and moral and social and political aspect of getting together and playing in the way that you have done, in a sort of methodological way, is maybe in some sense related and can have that kind of importance in a society and actually change the way things are going on. But so my question would be, how can we accentuate that? How can we avoid falling into the trap of looking at the product or producing a text, and how can we describe this important sort of ethical condition that it is to play together? How can we make that into something that others can relate to? And I like the word debate. How can we debate that in a way that it makes, that the urgency of that situation becomes a factor?
Can I respond?
Yeah, okay. I thought Claes might want to, but of course, Stefan, you hadn't said a single word.
He's had his time.
It's your time now.
You have 3 years.
But I think it's very important. So
Yeah.
I will say something later on.
I agree. When you've done your next project, you can speak again. No, but I also do not normally refer to transversality. I think, and we discussed this when we met in the black box some months ago also, I rather refer to Latour's modes of existence and the idea of how you can negotiate, between these modes of existence. And it was very obvious, and this gets us back to this question of universality and situatedness, because it's so very much in the performative knowledge of the members of this group that the knowledge is constructed. But what was very exciting to follow during those 2 days was with the ease that all members of the group would sort of oscillate, as you were saying before, between philosophical reflections on what you were doing and the actual, just getting back to doing it. But I think much of the answer to your question, Henrik, is that performative knowledge needs to be shared, and as such, and that's of course what happened. So I guess I should start by thanking all of you for inviting us to take part in this really quite exciting and transformative practice that you're developing. And I would like to return to this after lunch, but exactly this question that Annette is posing, I think, is very relevant and is really at the heart of what the important outcomes, as was the slide before, are of a project like this. It is a shared knowledge that it is performative, it's situated and embodied, and it's one of the really central questions for artistic research. How do we find ways of dissemination of performative knowledge? It's much easier to see how material artistic knowledge can be transferred. You put it on CD, you publish your score, but performative knowledge is difficult, and you sort of need to find ways of creating this sharing. And we already discussed when we were here in these sessions, some ideas for how that might be taken further. And it included all disciplines than the ones that Annette represents. And maybe we can talk about that after lunch.
Can I say
yes.
a brief comment? Then you can continue. I think it's not only about sharing, but the challenge is how can we use the knowledge from previous artistic research. Now we are at that stage that it's not only that we share the knowledge produced in artistic research, but how can we develop further knowledge that has been produced by others?
Exactly, but that's actually what I mean by sharing, because when only by sharing it can it be used by others. Yeah? And I mean, by sharing this knowledge already for 2 days, I mean, it becomes possible for Henrik and me to, in a certain sense, appropriate, the kind of knowledge that you are creating. And to me, it seems to be one of the few ways in which this can really happen. But of course, there are also other possibilities, and they probably have to do with how this transfer between modes of existence can be made, efficient. And the diagram is interesting because, as Henrik was saying, when we came to these sessions, we were full of questions, and they had to do with: isn't this actually composition? What is this a flat or a top-down sort of collaborative structure? What do you mean by collective improvisation if you have scores? All these kinds of questions that are sort of misunderstandings that come from a relative failure of this translation from one mode of knowledge to the other. But just to end on this question of transversality, I think there's a very strong possibility in this project to create an actual transfer between modes of existence here. And we've seen in Europe, in artistic research, so many failed attempts at doing philosophy and music. And I really think that this project is one of the few that holds the possibility of really contributing to philosophy through the embodied knowledge of performing. And that, I think, is also another important outcome. Thank you.
Claes?
Yeah.
A really brief
No.
I think Claes should be able to reply.
Yeah, I just want to say very short, because I think what's important for me, and I guess it is kind of radical, is that it's really about affect. It's about the affective modulations, if you want. It's for me, everything, each mode, like you said, the modes of existence, if we call it that, each mode is different. It's not for me a translation. It's not the text could describe. I mean, it could, but it's for me that's not a very useful thing. It just keeps us getting more and more stuck in representation, like you were talking about before. And the whole idea of what we're doing, for me, is to present something that is an alternative to that. Something which breaks this spell of thinking according to the hylomorphic model, the idea that there is an external form that has to be imposed on matter and all that crap. Sorry, because we need something else. We need something that moves us in a different way, so that we don't see the world in these kinds of terms of identities and units and stuff like that. So the world becomes mobile, and we become non-unitary and all that thing. So for me, the text is not a translation. It's not a description. It's another mode that has effective consequences, and that's the real possibility for me with artistic research. Of course, if we approach this text, or if we approach every different mode as something as in terms of hierarchy or in terms of divides, then it will become really difficult, because we will expect something from the text. We are going to expect a description or an explanation or something like that. Yeah, that's that's why it's so important to me. To get beyond these, that's why transversality is so important, I think, in this project, to break that
Binaries.
thing. Yeah, something like that.
Kim, it seems like you have something to...
Yeah,
And then Henrik.
I have a lot of things to say, but I have, as Annette, written down my thoughts, but I don't think maybe it's not the time for reading this. No, we can after lunch. Yeah, after lunch, and maybe Henrik would like to say something.
Yeah, Henrik.
Well, it's really it's just a short comment, but because I think partly it has to do with some subtleties of how we talk about things. And you're quoting in the text Henk Bordorf writing, invite us to this towards the artistic practice then. Invite us to fundamentally unfinished thinking and prompt us towards a critical perspective on what there is. Which is, fine, but I have a problem with this unfinished thinking, because I don't think it is unfinished thinking. I think what's going on in the practice is fundamental in itself, and then this idea that there's a critical perspective on what there is, as if there is something, rather than that, I would prefer something like a Deleuzean becoming. There's always a becoming. It can become something. It's not what it is. So these are the kind of subtleties that I think sometimes we, when we talk about these things, maybe it's just, partly it's a matter of just being really careful with how we talk about it.
But maybe it's just more about how we read that sentence. As always, we read that in context. For me, everything is unfinished, or what Bakhtin would call unfinalizable. That is process for me. We can have temporary points where we stop if we want, but if we can always also emphasize the unfinished. So in that sense, that quote resonates extremely well with this project, because it's what we've been doing all the time. We've been looking forward for new possibilities. So where are the tensions in what we're doing now that we could bring forth and do something more with, that are always there? And the critical perspective on what is precisely that, what you just said. Not to get stuck with that there is this idea of a fixture or something. So it can become something that's more movable or becoming. So that's what that quote meant for me. But of course, it depends on how we read it. So.
Do anyone have any comments? Because I thought that we could maybe spend the 20 last minutes talking about the artist subject and the subjectivity in artistic research. Just a little kind of a nice topic. Because I think that is one of the challenges what you're doing in this project. You're critiquing and undoing kind of autonomous subjectivity in this project, which I think, I think it's really interesting. And I want to hear with the panel what's your take on this way of thinking? Shall we call it desubjectivizing, or whatever? What should we call it? Criticizing the autonomous artist subject. Stefan.
I find that really important in the project too, and it has to do with a field that I'm really interested in. The possibilities in artistic collaboration between composer and performer, between improvising musicians, between disciplines and across disciplines. And I think this. So when I think of the interaction between musicians, I tend to look at how, first of all, a musician is situated in a certain musical context. You build over time. You're socialized into a habitus, which is the sort of embodied means with which you, for instance, learn to interact with a musical instrument, and this produces a voice. And in musical collaboration, you negotiate individual voices. So in collaboration with the composer, what I tend to call a discursive voice emerges through through this collaboration. Now, I see this project as a very strong articulation of exactly that kind of negotiation of voice. And we talked about this a little bit when we met for the workshop. And I could imagine doing a huge meta study on this project because there's so much data. I won't do it, but it would be I would be really happy if someone else did. Because I think it's such great material, especially now with all the collected citations from all members of the group and with all the videos from these workshops. And also, in a sense, if just like Kat was saying before, it is a kind of reduced situation compared to much improv, and you have no audience, and it's been sort of important for you to be in the black room, set yourselves up in the same way every time, and just do these things, and the only sort of interference is the guests that you invite, but otherwise it's... No, I'm kidding, but the reduction of the situation is interesting, and it gives a certain focus on how these voices are present and how they are negotiated through these 3 years. And that's where so the way I think of musical subjectivity, it is the result of all of these many factors that are sort of embodied, they're culturally and socially situated, and they become negotiated in any situation in which musicians get together and do this kind of work. And that's what I think is so beautifully articulated in the documentation of this process. And it is something that is in here, and it sort of points to the dynamic in this kind of configuration of artists that are not subjects in the sense that we normally tend to think of humans, but they are rather a sort of constant becoming, and that's what I think is the possibility in this meta study. And you can just register it later, and I'll be really happy to accommodate your work into, for instance, the School of Music in Piteå. You're welcome. So I think for that kind of study, I mean, this project is really a promise.
Anyone else?
Well, first, when I listen to you, I start to think that in terms of like subjectification, if you want to use that word, is an ensemble actually a subject? Is playing together producing a new subject that is somehow collective, even though, and so that's another thing. But of course, then I think of, as a sort of mono artist, I think that there is, of course, musicians use instruments. I have a camera. I sit on a tree stump. The work is done by everybody else but the subject. So this idea of, how should I say, the idea of the isolated individual artist, it's very hard to maintain for I can't imagine for whom, but if I think of musicians who have instruments, I mean, the instruments has quite a lot of agency, I would imagine. But
well, I think it's been seen in many artistic research projects, including my PhD. That was a really, really strong thread. I think I talked about it as losing oneself. I mean, removing myself from the, and I see that in a lot of projects. There seems to be an important sort of almost an outcome of engaging in artistic research in your own practices, that the questioning of the role of the self.
And at the same time, I think that's kind of contrasting to the kind of market forces or a kind of neoliberal idea of that really seeks to promote the artist subject because that's possible to sell, right? So, and I think that in somehow also connects to your idea of micropolitics into this project. Is there something you want to say about that? And now I'm referring to the addressing the research project, because I think that's also heavily important. Klaus, maybe, if you want to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, this micro-political dimension of what we've been doing in the research project, but also the music itself, is very, very important. It's to break that thinking of individuality that's so established in our modern global thinking in terms of consumption and identity and all that stuff. So any way we can find to break that, whether that's breaking the spell of representation or using affect to kind of break into our conception of ourselves as unitary subjects or something, is important, because we are so stuck, I think, in this thing. And so, for example, the music for me has this, any kind of experimental art, I think, can have that quality where it ruptures something. It breaks. It challenges us to become active, to work with ourselves while being part of this artistic experience in some way, and then something happens. It ruptures the habits that we have, whether it's perceptional or in thinking or something like that. So I strongly believe that the music has that force. I was thinking about your point earlier, Henrik, about process and product. I do have this trust in the music that it has a certain power also when there's a process behind it, that it is collectively created in the way that I feel that we are doing, that also somehow comes through, that it has that effect and those affects for a listener. Of course, it also has to be responded to. That challenge has to be responded to also by someone. Am I willing to go into this process of not knowing, not being in control of the experience, not recognizing necessarily? So something happens there. And yeah, I think that's a very important micro-political aspect of what we do and of experimental art at large. And the texts and other stuff that we've been doing can create resonances with that. What did you feel about that? When you read the text and the website and everything, and you haven't, as you said, heard the live perspective, what would you say is your understanding of how we have dealt with that micropolitic?
I think it's very obvious.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I can comment on it at large now, because I want to let in the audience. It's only 10 minutes, but we can maybe we can continue to talk about after lunch, if it's okay. Because but to just reply, I think it's been very obvious both in the text, but also on the website, that you have actively dealt with that. Definitely.
Can I say something? Yeah. Well, the micropolitical and the, let's say, social political core of our work. I mean, that's obvious, I think, but we don't. I can't get by that. There is also very important aesthetic component. I mean, if we wouldn't like the music we do, but we do it in a beautiful way, it would be. I mean, it is part of the aesthetic dimension is really a part of all of this also. Very, very, I mean, we cannot talk about the music as just a social product. It is an aesthetic product. And that, of course, you could think of this diagram that some completely other musicians, other aesthetics, other ideas, other backgrounds, other goals would use it, it would sound completely different. But with us, it sounds like this, because it's also shared aesthetic experience that we somehow have refined and molded and worked with, and so that's very important. So I mean, the subject is the music.
Yeah,
Thank you, Anna. Kim.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, because I think we are heading towards the music. And I would like us to talk more about how this music actually sounds and what your perspectives are for your expectations from the beginning and from the listener's view, the audience and how this can resonate in an audience. And I would also like to hear Åsa's perspective, because you said you have been reading and not being to concerts, but you have looked into this website, of course. And so maybe, I don't know if we have time now or we are going to continue with this more into the music after lunch. But
I think that's a great beginning to start with after lunch.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, varsågod.
I'm working with film, so I'm not in the same field as you guys, but I know Claes is long, and it's interesting because I'm both working as a director and a producer, and I was having kind of a problem with one of the projects that I'm directing, and what you do in film many times is that you try to kind of narrow down and create a dramaturgy that works to push the film forward. So Claes came to me with, I don't know if it was exactly this one, but it was quite similar to this one, and he showed this one, and I was like, okay, this is completely far away from what we are doing within film. But it was very interesting because what we did was kind of break the narrative and start opening it up in a completely different type of process. And it completely changed the way that we have now been working with the dramaturgy of that film. So I think this is also a diagram that can really be used in different fields of artistic research and practices. Just want to say that.
And I have a question. I'm interested in this collective versus individual aspect of communicating or discussing or playing or whatever you call it. Because I sense that there are like two directions you could go. One would be the more Buddhistic thing, that you kind of erase yourself and become something one or whatever. Or the other one would be a more sympathetic, individualistic, capitalistic society, if that would, where you are very strong individuals, but you really listen to each other and dance with each other and give each other the space and create something around that. So it's just like as if they would be two juxtapositions or whatever, how you have worked with that or dealt with that.
I think something with this project that I've come upon a lot is that it's this sort of Buddhist term, third way. It's neither of those things when we play. It frees itself of both of those things by being a third thing. And that's what's valuable about it to me, because I'm interested in that too. And the way that things either are unfinished or becoming or what have you, is and that they are constantly falling apart. So they defy both poles of that continuum and head another direction. One of the things about improvised music in general, that at least the communities of it that I've been around, anyway, like on the much more kind of brutal end of this, like I played this concert in Baltimore, and it was 3 musicians I super admire, and we all like each other a lot, and we tried to play together, and it was a fail for about the first 30 minutes, and then like the last 10 minutes was really great. So somebody came up and was like, that was horrible until the last 10 minutes, and that's why I love it. And I was like, oh? You know, and he's like, yeah, because only in improvised music can I hear the thing that you did at the end. There's no other place I can hear that. And this project encapsulates that without having to go through this very brutal process first, because we have another process we've made instead, where there isn't this, you know, kind of unarticulated, unexamined struggle with those very things. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Per-Anders. No, with... Yeah.
being a pre-improviser myself, I'm of course very interested in this one. I asked Claes when I came here, oh, this is a commercial project because there are more than 7 people listening. But I think about it because we are all doing a lot of gigs with like 3 persons coming, 5, sometimes many. But I remember a student of mine, I'm from Gothenburg, said, we talk about this political thing about playing this kind of music. Oh, it's political to do this. And for instance, if you read about like Michael Nyman's experimental music and stuff, like minimalism and something, has been commercial. But I think mostly of this kind of music has resisted to become commercial in that sense, which is a good thing. So I really like the idea that we're still playing for a few people, because we are doing it for ourselves. I don't know if you have thought about that idea. It's something very important. We resist. We do it because we like to do it, and we must do it because it's something communal or collective among us, rather than being someone or make a career or something. If you understand what I mean, I think I really encourage you to investigate in this kind of what's happening here. So, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, for me personally, there's a tension there because if we are in a cultural situation where we're expected to pitch what we're doing all the time, of course that affects our art and the way we view ourselves. And I mean, sometimes this happens in very subtle but very destructive ways, I think. I mean, it could be the way we present things in social media, for example, and stuff like that. And personally, I don't think whether something is commercial or not has to do with how many people are actually attending. For me, it's a great thing if there is a large audience to play for, and I don't see that would have necessarily direct correlation with if it's a commercial thing. So for me, it's wonderful to have many people to meet. But of course, there is always that tension. I agree, and it's interesting to connect back with all the political, countercultural threads of improvised music. That, for example, Daniel Belgrad wrote a beautiful book, Culture of Spontaneity, where he discusses those things. And I feel a lot of affiliation, of course, with that tradition, if you want, that micropolitical criticism. And it's extremely difficult to navigate in that today with social media and the climate of how we approach identities and pitch ourselves. And sometimes it's a lot of anxiety in that, because I also have to live and, support myself, and I have children and everything like that. But yeah, I totally agree. It's really important.
We have another...
I just want to...
Okay, and then we have another question from the audience.
I just want to say that in terms of what you just said and what you said about improvised music scenes, that this project for me is one of the only times in my life that I felt like there has been a step forward into a new mode of thinking about those micropolitical things that is not reactionary. Even the most steady third way kinds of situations I've been in have some aspect of the reactionary, and this does not. And that's crazily important for me anyway.
Yeah, I think you said something like it's delicate. It's delicate in that sense.
Yeah.
At some point, yeah.
Okay, audience.
Thank you, Erkki Huovinen. I work here in the field of music education. I'm also interested in what has already brought up about how this knowledge that is being produced in these kinds of contexts could be shared. I won't even mention the collaborative improvisatory aspects and sharing that sort of knowledge, but I want to pick up another aspect which I find interesting, which relates to what you have been discussing under the concept of transversality, and which is that obviously there's a long history, as we know, of artists using inspiration and ideas from other fields. How Renaissance composers wanted to recreate the music of antiquity. Of course, they did something totally different, but they were inspired by the texts and by the descriptions and so on. in the 19th century they read Schopenhauer. In the 20th century, so many artists have read psychoanalysis, and so on and so forth. We all know different examples of these kinds of things. And I'm wondering if there is anything we have learned about this sort of phenomenon that could help us find suitable answers for the question, how can we, what are we going to learn about our practices here now? If you have read your literature, you have had your inspirations from various fields of thinking, do we learn something when we look back to the history of similar kinds of inspirational sources and transversal processes, if you will? Can we, for instance, as individual artists or thinkers, can we personally react by saying that no, that's not the kind of that model that I recognize there in the history is not what I want to pursue. I want to develop, I want to twitch it a little bit for myself, or something like that. How is there? Do you have anything to say, anything interesting to say about this? How have you stepped forward in this direction?
I think this is an absolutely perfect start after the lunch break, because it's 1 minute past 12.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. It's maybe something that we should have more time to discuss. If you also will return at 1 o'clock, so you get to be part of the discussion, I hope. But I mean, I think for me personally, I turn back a lot and try to learn or work with the past in many different ways. And for me, it's by tweaking. It's by relating to it, by activizing it or reactivizing it from my own perspective. But I guess the whole difference here is between process thinking and or process art and representational art or thinking. So it's not like I'm trying to. It wouldn't be very useful for me to adopt a model, for example, that's not process-based. Then I have to processualize it. I have to make it processable somehow. That's how I relate to things, because then it becomes useful in improvisation practice, I think. But yeah, I think it would be great if we could return to maybe start with that question. And so we'll take a lunch break and start at let's say 10 past 1, so we have a little time, or maybe we can make it. It's only 3 past. Yeah, we'll start at 1, and we're going to start play for you then. Again, so music comes back into our bodies and immerses us after the lunch when we all feel tired. So thank you for this right now. See you tomorrow.